We're talking about education and the differences between education in the different regions of the colonies. The Northeast or New England, the Chesapeake, or the South. Education was much more valued in which region of the colonies? New England, okay? And that's evidenced by many well-to-do families sending their children to the establishments that were created there for higher learning. A lot of, in the South, it's not that they didn't have education. It's just the well-to-do families of the South, the large plantation owners, when their boys were old enough for higher education, they would send them back to England, to English institutions for, in order to receive a college education, just simply because the South did not have that kind of setup. I mean, there was not much educational opportunity there. But in New England, where education was a little more highly valued, because many of those Congregationalist churches and ministers, they needed more ministers. And so the purpose of these educations were really, their foundations were to teach young boys to be like Puritan ministers. So there were several local colleges that were established during the colonial era, and you already know of several. Harvard was the first. Yale, Princeton, Penn, Columbia, Brown, Rutgers, Dartmouth. There were a whole bunch, and those were known as the Ivy League schools. Rutgers is now currently a public state institution, but it's a very old institution in New Jersey. And it's not like these were enormous like colleges, like it's not like a WVU where there's 40,000 students. That's not what these colleges looked like, okay? Student enrollments were small, usually around 200 boys at a time. So these colleges that you've probably even heard of were smaller than our school, like 200 kids, like the size of your all's class, like the sophomore class, okay? And a few juniors as well, okay? So, the instruction, your class size may have been about 11, and it was not the most engaging instruction, basically, because not everybody had books. There were books, but not everybody had them. They were still kind of expensive. And the professor had the books, and the professor, their lecture would be the professor reading the book and you frantically writing down as much of it as you could so that you could have a book. Riveting and engaging instruction, that is. So, needless to say, the instruction was poor by today's standards, and the curriculum was still heavily laden with theology. And they made you learn languages that were no longer spoken, and particularly Latin. Latin was a main course. Now I'm hungry. They learned Latin, as Latin was an early translation of the Bible. St. Jerome did it from Greek to Latin, so it was an early translation. Okay, and a person who made a significant contribution to this and played a major role in launching what became to be the University of Pennsylvania, or today we just call it Penn, and it became the first, like, I don't want to call it public school, but the first college that was free from any kind of denomination, was not associated with faith. And many people refer to this versatile person as the first civilized American. Does anybody know who this might be? Anybody know who that is? Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, often referred to as the first civilized American, is also, he is like a true Renaissance man. And he's got his fingers going in a lot of different directions. He's everywhere doing a lot of different things. His autobiography is an American classic. He was best known by his contemporaries. What does that mean? If he's best known by his contemporaries, best known by the other people that were alive at his time, for a publication called Poor Richard's Almanac. You ever heard of it? He published it and was the editor of it from like 1732 to 1758. He was the publisher of Poor Richard's Almanac, beginning in 1732. Pretty old.
Wait, what was it called?
Poor Richard's Almanac. Weird name, huh? Very popular publication of its day. But, and the reason why is because it contained a lot of like quick-witted, pithy sayings. And it was all about virtue, not necessarily American virtues, because there was no American virtue, but these pithy sayings that he cultivates in this Poor Richard's Almanac build those virtues, like thrift and industry and morality and common sense. And he would say things like, honesty is the best policy. Have you ever heard that? Benjamin Franklin wrote that in Poor Richard's Almanac, okay? Or plow deep while the sluggards sleep. Probably never heard that one. Work hard while others are taking a day off. You can gain an advantage, and you can make something of yourself. Or a penny saved is a penny earned. You ever heard that? All right. Or fish and visitors both stink after 3 days. That's a quick-witted thing. There's only two things guaranteed in life: death and taxes. These are all the sayings that were in Poor Richard's Almanac. So, and Benjamin Franklin wrote all that. So he, as a result of the Poor Richard's Almanac, he had a great amount of influence in the development and shaping of American character. American character, okay? Because other places like in Europe and England, it didn't matter how hard you worked, it didn't matter how smart you were. If you were born lower class, you were going to die lower class. There was no real upward social mobility without title and without land. In America, that's not so. You work hard, you cultivate your land, you can have as much land as you want, really, and you can make something of yourself in these early colonial era. And Benjamin Franklin, with Poor Richard's Almanac, does a lot to cultivate that American character. All right? Now, he doesn't just write things. I told you he did a lot of different things. And he was also on the forefront of American science. He used science to rise above the shackles of superstition. And he was making some progress behind, in his own way. And very few Americans had won any kind of reputation as a scientist in any field, like botany or math or astronomy. But Benjamin Franklin was probably the only first-rate scientist in the American colonies. The only person in all the colonies that could be considered as a serious scientist. Kind of sad. But he was. And he gains world renown, literally world renown, world fame for his experiments with, the famous flying kite, proving that lightning was a form of electricity. He doesn't invent electricity. It had been around for quite some time. He just proves that lightning is a form of electricity through a very dangerous experiment, flying a kite in a thunderstorm with a metal attached to it on one end and metal attached to it on the other. I'm not the guy wanting to hold the kite, okay? But he survives, and this experiment and his, the evidence that he collects from it won him honors. He went to Europe and received prizes and awards. Like, he's world renowned. But his mind also had a practical turn, and he was also the creator of numerous inventions, really helpful, useful, practical items. One that is still used quite frequently today, bifocals. Now, We are all young and healthy and fruitful and have no need for such things. But as we get older and our eyes begin to weaken, it's kind of hard to imagine that, like, not being able to read the numbers on like your phone because you can't read them anymore, even though they're right there, because your eyes are weakening. But you can see them when you look farther away, but you can't see them close up. Okay, you're nearsighted or farsighted, one of those. Anyway, what the bifocals do is it gives you two different lenses. So when you look down and you're reading, you look through the bottom of the lens and you can read. It's your prescription for reading. And then you look up and you look through the top of the lenses and you can see things far away. And that's what the bifocal does. Okay, and he invented that. That is his invention. Very practical. He himself wore them because, that's why he invented them. Necessity is the motivator for a lot of inventions. All right. He also invents this thing called the Franklin stove. It's just a wood-burning stove. That's all it really is. But how is this practical and helpful? I mean, what existed before this? Fireplaces. How's a fireplace different than a wood-burning stove? Okay, that's a good guess.
Maybe it uses different things to heat.
Okay, also a good guess.
Is it like a pellet stove?
All right, it didn't burn pellets, but a pellet stove would be looks like a Franklin stove for certain. All right, a fireplace is just like a hole in your wall with a chimney, and it's extremely inefficient because where's the majority of your heat go? Right up the chimney. Very little gets out into the room. This, you build a fire in a box, a firebox, and you heat that metal up, and that metal acts like a radiator, and it radiates for hours and hours, and it's much more efficient. You have to use less firewood, and you can heat longer with less firewood, which is awesome. That's awesome. Okay? Not that there's anything wrong with fireplaces. They're just more inefficient than a Franklin stove. Okay? I've had one, just a wood-burning stove, and it's far superior to a fireplace in terms of getting the most out of your firewood. All right? So he also, you ever seen one of those? This one's been used. You know what that is? He likes electricity. It's a lightning rod. It's just a big metal rod that you put at the peak of the tallest point of your home or your barn. And if lightning strikes your structure, it'll direct the electricity in the way you want it to go and not set your house on fire. So they put these on almost every skyscraper in the world now. It's just a lightning rod to divert electricity down into the ground. And he invented it.
And shock the people.
Well, actually, no. The way they do it in modern technology, lightning can strike the building and it diverts it all the way down into the ground, and no one can be hurt because it's grounded. It's grounded. Okay. Yeah. Like I say, I'm not a scientist. I'm not sure of the machinations of AC, DC, but he invented the lightning rod. Okay, a practical invention with a purpose. All right, so pretty awesome American. One of the first self-made millionaires in the colonies. Super wealthy guy, and extremely popular and famous. And we mentioned about his almanac, Poor Richard's Almanac. Now, Americans were generally too poor to buy great quantities of books. Books were way better than anything else because it's like watching a movie in your hand. Okay, carry it around. It's like a movie. It's a longer amount of entertainment value. So books were more expensive. So most Americans that were generally too poor to buy books, or simply too busy to read them. You work all day in your land, and then you go inside at night and it's dark. You don't want to waste candles reading. So there were very few private libraries of fair size to be found. So when Benjamin Franklin starts using his hand-operating printed press to start printing out his almanac, it really does change things for a lot of people, particularly in Philadelphia, that's where his printing press was located. And he printed other things, colonial newspapers and weeklies, and mostly it was just all on one single large sheet of paper. Like one big sheet of paper, like that. Like the entire newspaper would be one sheet of paper, okay? And that's how they would print things, because that way they didn't have to have folds and multiple types going at the same time. It was much more efficient to just simply have one big piece of paper. Okay? Now, because of all this, and you begin to see people having an interest in the news. And so people begin to compete with one another over whose newspaper is going to be purchased. All right? And that becomes part of the American character as well. Competition and getting out information. All right? You'll see that as a theme as we go throughout American history, how the news influences not only citizens but government as well. And you can see that even in our own culture today. Like some people will only watch one news channel, right? Okay, so moving on. I want to talk to you about this guy. His name is John Peter Zenger. Zenger. Now I want a Little Debbie cake. It's called the Zenger decision, and it's a court case, not a Supreme Court case. It's just a trial that happened. And in this trial, it happened in 1734 and 1735, lasted between that time. John Peter Zenger was a newspaper printer. He operated a printing press. And he was from New York, the city. In New York. And this case reflects the give and take of politics in the colonies. All right? So Zenger's newspaper was printing articles that was, just to keep it plain, talking smack about the royal governor of New York, the king's man, talking junk about him. Today we're like, big whoop. You know, I saw a newspaper article the other day and like waiting at the checkout line at the grocery store, and it was like, President Obama has child with alien babies, and it has 3 heads, and it's addicted to heroin. You can say anything you want about politicians now, okay? That was not the case when you start talking about the king's man, the royal governor of New York. So John Peter Zenger was charged with libel, L-I-B-E-L. Do you guys know what libel means? Libel is the written form of slander. You guys know what slander is? It's where you're maliciously spreading falsehoods about someone. So he was hauled off to court, and he was defended by a newly made attorney named Andrew Hamilton. And Zenger argued that he had printed the truth, that it was not a malicious falsehood. It's a malicious truth. This guy was a jerk, and I'm telling everybody. Well, the prosecution, the people trying to get Zenger in trouble, says it doesn't matter if it's true or false. The fact that it was negative and the fact that it was printed about the royal governor is enough to be illegal. So that's your two sides. Zenger says it doesn't matter if it's negative about him. I'm printing the truth, and people have a right to know the truth. And then the governor's lawyer, the prosecution, says, regardless of if it's true or false, you don't print negative things about your leadership. How do you think this case ended? Who do you think the court sided with?
Not Zenger?
Zinger.
Oh, what?
Zinger.
We have the freedom.
That's why we're talking about it. Because this is a banner moment in American history. Because what does this decision ultimately is it aspire to? The First Amendment, the freedom of the press. Freedom of the press, freedom of expression even. freedom of speech. All of those things that we hold so dear as Americans really have their foundational basis in this guy, John Peter Zenger, for standing up against the royal governor of New York. So it's a banner achievement for freedom of the press and for the health of democracy. If you don't have that, you don't have democracy. So it pointed the way to a kind of public, open discussion, which is necessary for a diverse society of people to coexist with one another and have democracy. You've got to be able to talk to each other. So, therefore, after that, newspapers were eventually free to print responsible criticisms. They couldn't just print outright lies like today. But they could print responsible criticism of powerful officials. So it's not quite full-on freedom of the press like we have. But man, it's way better than it was. Imagine like just saying, oh, the king looked like he had a dirt spot on his jacket and be put in prison for that because you said something negative about the king. That's kind of how it was. The slightest infraction, the slightest thing you said against the royal authorities could be detrimental to your health and well-being. Okay? All right. So questions on the Zenger decision, kind of a big deal. All right, so let's look at the lives of just average folk. Colonial life. Obviously, it depended upon where you lived, the kind of life you lived, but there were some similarities. Life in the colonies for your average citizen, not like the life of the average American today. Not even close. Very drab, very tedious. For most people, the labor was heavy and constant and never ending. Constant labor. Fortunately, food was plentiful. Nobody's starving to death in the New World, in the colonies, after things get established. Not so in Jamestown at the early years, the starving time. But once everything gets established, food was plentiful. Man, you guys can go out in your backyard right now and plant crops. We have good dirt in a lot of America. A lot of America is great for agriculture, okay? So food was plentiful, but the diet, what you actually ate, was very rugged and monotonous. You didn't have a lot of variety. You're a farmer, you're going to plant a lot of something, and that's what really is going to be the staple of your meals. So people still, but if you compare life in the New World, like the colonies, to the Old World, Americans probably ate more meat than Europeans did. Much like today. We eat more meat than any other people have ever even eaten meat combined. We eat a lot of meat, okay? So, really the only people that were hungry, I won't say the only. A lot of people that were hungry were just people that were either too sick to work or just lazy. Too lazy to work. So, basic comforts now that we have, that we take for granted, They didn't really have that. You go to church, your church is not heated. Your home is drafty and poorly heated, mainly by fireplaces, and as I already told you, are inefficient. Imagine having to get up 3 and 4 times a night on a cold night to keep the fire going because it's out and you're freezing. All right. No running water in homes, didn't exist. No plumbing. So when you got to go potty, where you go? You have 2 options. You could go in a bucket in a chamber pot and then dump it every day. Or you can go outside the outhouse. Outside. Not one single bathtub existed in colonial America. Very expensive to get. You guys ever tried to move a bathtub? Like one of those big old enamel clawfoot tubs? They're wild. Imagine trying to get that across the ocean. And just impractical and expensive. Homes were lit by candles and well oil lamps. You guys know what whale oil lamps are?
Well,
Yeah, it's a lamp, and the oil in it comes from an animal in the sea, a whale. It's refined and it's flammable. Can you imagine that? Like an animal that's flammable. Now they don't. You can't just set a whale on fire, but you have to refine the blubber to extract the whale oil. Ever heard the book? No. Ever heard of the book Moby Dick? Captain Ahab's trying to kill whales. Why is he trying to kill whales?
love it.
For the resources that it contains, including the oil. There was no like garbage pickup. Like, and you guys have that chore. You got to take the trash out. That didn't exist. So what did you do with your trash? Hogs. You fed it to your pigs. Hogs. And many communities, like cities, where trash was piling up. Now, they didn't have like plastic, okay? There was no like plastic containers. So your scraps and stuff in cities where a lot of people live in the same place where, I live like, if you live in like an apartment, you don't own hogs. So cities would actually purchase hogs from local farmers and let them roam the streets. And then you just throw your trash out on the street and the pigs would eat it. But then what do you got? You got pig poop everywhere. I mean, it's disgusting, because nobody's cleaning up after them. So you also get a lot of buzzards. And these animals were, in many communities, protected by law. It was unlawful to shoot the pigs or kill the pigs or the buzzards because they help keep the scraps up. And then I guess somebody would be charged with cleaning up after the pigs every once in a while. You guys ready to go back in time to colonial America? Yeah. Pig poop. Well, it wasn't all work. There was some play. There was a little bit of play. Amusement was often pursued whenever time permitted, if you had a moment. Or customs. It was not uncommon to see militias drilling periodically. It sounds kind of weird to us, but people would it would be like fun to go watch the soldiers march. No TV, guys. You gotta take advantage of what you can see. On the frontier, where there were no cities, people living kind of in scattered settlements, often settlers would come together and, work together to raise houses, build houses together, or the women would have quilting bees. You guys know what a quilting bee? You got all your materials ready, set, go. Who can make a quilt the fastest? Or husking bees. It's kind of like a spelling bee, only with corn husk. You know what you do? Who can husk the most ears of corn in a certain amount of time? Or apple paring bees. Who can take the skin off of an apple the cleanest and the best and the fastest? Competition. Now, much like today, there was also people gathering around for funerals and weddings, children being born, and those often afforded opportunities for social gathering, which primarily on the frontier consisted of vast quantities of liquor being consumed. Liquor was in great supply because a farmer living on the frontier grows so much corn, they grow a surplus. What are you going to do with your leftover corn that's going to go rotten if you don't do something with it? You turn into liquor. And you can use that liquor to trade. You can trade because you put the bottle of liquor in your home. Does it go bad? What if you put 10 bushels of corn in your home? It's going to spoil and attract rats and all kinds of things that are undesirable. Whereas the bottle of liquor could be used almost like currency. You could use it to trade. So liquor was consumed in vast amounts, especially on the frontiers, not necessarily in Puritan New England, okay? But on the frontiers in Appalachia and in the South and in the middle bread colonies, significant liquor was consumed. Winter sports were pretty common. In the North, the South doesn't really know what winter is. But in the north, they were pretty common. Winter sports. Yeah, ski, attach a couple boards to your feet. You could try to ski or at least hike through the mountain snow. The south afforded a few more opportunities for sports like horse racing, playing cards, dancing, fox hunting, and a favorite amongst many settlers, cockfighting, because it's sport and gambling. Cockfighting. You guys know what that is? Yeah, you take two roosters and they fight to the death, and you gamble on it. It's a favorite American pastime. Stage plays were also popular, like a theater performance, a stage play. In Puritan colonies, stage plays were forbidden. They weren't allowed. Very Puritan, forbidden by law. Very strict and straight-laced in the Puritan world. I mean, think about Hester Prynne and the Scarlet Letter. Strict. They were strict, moral people. Holidays were celebrated in the American colonies. Christmas was frowned upon in New England. Yeah. Thanksgiving became an American festival all over the colonies because it combined thanks to God with an opportunity for jollification and gorging and guzzling gallons of liquor. Sounds like an average American today. Not much different than Thanksgiving today for many families. Watch football, eat until you can't move, and then drink. You take the football away, that's pretty much what they did. Even in the early 1700s, they were celebrating Thanksgiving much like that. Okay? So there was, things were improving, but America still looked like a patchwork quilt of different people being gently stitched together by common origins and language and way of life. But ultimately, depending upon where you were from, you had vastly different beliefs and ideologies. And these were our colonies. Just think about how different the people were from the New England to the South, how different they were. And in just a few short years, they go from being like, I don't know you, I don't like you, we have different things the way we do, to being, hey, let's all be one. Let's all be the United States. So that's what we're going to be looking at in period 3. How do we go from a bunch of disunited colonists who do their own thing to, you know what, that king really sucks. Let's all be together and get along. So there's some stuff that happens. Okay? Does anybody have any questions? Okay, make sure you bring your Chromebooks with you tomorrow and every day.